He stood up at our daughter's graduation and announced in front of hundreds of people that he was leaving me. No warning, no discussion, just a performance. But while the crowd gasped and our daughter cried, I reached into my purse and handed him an envelope. He thought he had just humiliated me. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. And that envelope, it held the end of his plan and the beginning of mine. The sun was setting behind the bleachers, casting long shadows over rows of folding chairs and proud families. Our daughter, Ava, stood at the edge of the stage, adjusting her cap nervously, unaware that her world was about to splinter. Mine already had. I'd spent the morning steaming her gown, pressing her honor sash, and making sure the flowers I ordered would be waiting at her seat. It was her day, or at least it should have been. When the final name was called and the applause surged through the stadium, my husband, Daniel, stood up. I thought he was reaching for his phone, maybe to snap a picture of Ava as she walked toward us. But then I saw his hand go to his inside jacket pocket. He stepped forward. He raised his voice. "I want to say something," he announced, his tone oddly firm. "This is a new beginning for Ava, and also for me. I've decided to start a new life on my own." A hush dropped over our section of the crowd, like a curtain falling on the wrong act. People turned. A few gasped. Ava froze mid-step. The principal shifted awkwardly behind the podium. I didn't speak. I reached into my own purse and pulled out a pale gray envelope. I handed it to him, gently, deliberately, right there under the banner that read, "Congratulations, graduates." He looked confused. That wasn't part of his script. "My name is Marissa Lake. I'm 52 years old, a wife of 27 years, a mother of 2, and a woman who learned, quietly and thoroughly, that silence is not the same as surrender. Daniel used to call me the calm in the storm. He never realized I could be the storm if I needed to." The envelope was thick, sealed, and unmarked, except for the initials embossed at the bottom, DLM, his initials. His hands trembled slightly as he took it, eyes darting between me and the gathering crowd. The silence pressed harder. Ava's face was blank, unreadable. Daniel opened the envelope. He read the first page, and that's when the smirk cracked. He kept reading. His lips parted as if he might say something, but nothing came out. Only silence, then a visible flush creeping up his neck. I turned and walked away. Not hurried, not crying, just composed. The same way I had been while preparing that envelope for the last 6 weeks. He thought he had shocked me, but he was the one standing there, holding a document he never saw coming. Until recently, I thought I was still a wife. Not a perfect one, not the woman who keeps the house spotless or remembers to defrost the chicken before dinner, but someone who shows up, who stays, who does the hard parts quietly, because that's what love sometimes requires. Daniel and I met when I was 23. I had just started teaching middle school English. He came in to install a new security system after the school received a state grant. We bonded over coffee during a fire drill and a shared hatred for long meetings. He was charming in a low-effort way, dry wit, hands always in his pockets, always a little late, but never without a reason that made me laugh. He asked me out after our 3rd conversation. We were married a year later. I used to think we had the kind of marriage other people envied, steady, practical, low drama. We made decisions together, saved well, raised our kids with intention. I put my teaching career on pause when Ava was born and took freelance editing jobs instead. We didn't have fireworks, but we had rhythm. We had years, and that felt like enough until it didn't. Something shifted around our 20th anniversary. It was subtle at first. Daniel became more withdrawn, less interested in shared things. He took more solo trips, started sleeping in the guest room when he said his back hurt. He still brought flowers on birthdays, still helped clean the gutters every spring, but the warmth was missing, like he was performing partnership without truly being in one. I remember one morning last year, I'd made pancakes. He was scrolling through his phone, not even pretending to be present. I asked if he'd like syrup or jam. He looked up, blinked like I'd startled him, then said, "Whatever's easiest." I stared at him, realizing I'd become background noise in my own kitchen. Still, I stayed. Not because I was naive, but because I believed in repairing what you build. I believed in Ava's final year of high school, in stability, in not unraveling a family structure just because it got uncomfortable. But over time, I stopped ignoring the signs, the secretive texts, the sudden gym membership, the weekends away that always had vague business explanations. I didn't confront him immediately. I watched, I paid attention, and slowly I began preparing. The woman Daniel stood next to at that graduation ceremony was not the same woman he married. She was sharper, quieter, and far more dangerous with the truth. The truth is, I started losing Daniel years before I admitted it to myself. Not all at once, but in slow, barely noticeable increments, like a photo left too long in the sun. I used to know every beat of his routine, the way he stirred sugar into his coffee, how he always whistled when mowing the lawn, how he'd wrap a dish towel around his wrist without realizing. Those details faded, replaced by absences I couldn't name. I remember the first time I felt it, real, not imagined. We were at a dinner party, sitting with friends we'd known for decades. Someone made a joke about long marriages and the secret to keeping them alive. Daniel raised his glass and said, "Sometimes the secret is knowing when to let go." He laughed, but not the kind of laugh that invited others in. It was sharp, sealed, and I felt it like a flicker of cold air under my skin. After that, things didn't fall apart. They stretched. We still shared a bed, a bank account, a calendar, but emotionally, we were in different homes. I started noticing how often he traveled. He suddenly had conferences in cities he'd never shown interest in before: Chicago, Denver, Seattle. Always 2 or 3 days. Always just long enough for suspicion to rise, but never long enough to catch. When I'd ask who he was traveling with, he'd name someone vague from work, someone I'd never met. He was careful, but not perfect. Once, I found a receipt in his coat pocket from a hotel in Napa: 2 glasses of wine, a room service dinner for 2. I didn't ask. I didn't cry. I filed it away. That was the moment I stopped hoping he'd come back and started preparing for what would come next. I began documenting, quietly, meticulously, screenshots of unusual account activity, dates and times of trips, a journal I kept tucked into an old recipe binder. I consulted a divorce attorney under the name Lake and Emerson Consulting, a fake freelance project I created as a cover. It was the most dishonest I'd ever been in our marriage, and yet it felt like the most honest thing I'd done in years. He stopped touching me around the same time he started going to the gym. He lost weight, grew out a bit of stubble, and started wearing cologne again, something he hadn't done since our second child was born. I watched him become someone else right in front of me, someone preparing for a new chapter that didn't include me. Our daughter, Ava, noticed too. She asked me once, "Is Dad okay?" I told her he was just tired. She gave me a long look, the kind teenagers give when they already know you're lying, but they're willing to let you have your moment. There was one night a few months before graduation when he came home late, past midnight. I was awake, reading. He smelled like expensive soap and wine. He didn't say where he'd been, just kissed the top of my head and said, "I'm lucky you're so understanding." I wasn't. I was calculating, and when I finally sat across from my lawyer, I laid out everything I had. She called it the cleanest, dirty case she'd seen in a while. There was no screaming, no violence, just a man easing his way out of a marriage like it was a timeshare he no longer used, and a woman who refused to let him walk away on his terms. We agreed to wait until after Ava's graduation to act. I thought he would wait too. But Daniel had always liked being the one to pull the trigger. Control, after all, was his favorite language. That's why, when he stood up at that ceremony to announce our divorce in front of hundreds of people, including our daughter, I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I simply handed him what I'd been working on for weeks, an envelope, one that would rewrite his exit. The envelope I handed Daniel that day wasn't dramatic on the outside. No bold print, no flashy markings, just thick paper and quiet weight. But inside? Inside was the reason I didn't scream when he blindsided me in front of our daughter and the entire graduating class. The first page was a letter written in my handwriting, printed on cream paper. Not emotional, not angry, just facts. What he had done, what I had discovered, and what would happen next. It wasn't addressed to him emotionally, it was addressed to him legally. Every sentence had been reviewed by my attorney, every word placed with surgical care. The next page was a financial summary. All the bank transfers he thought I wouldn't notice. The account in Arizona he opened under his middle name, the payments to a boutique travel agency, the private gym membership billed under a false corporate name. I had screenshots, bank statements, timelines, all in chronological order, all cross-referenced. Page 3, that was the declaration of divorce. My filing, already in process, dated 2 weeks before he made his little graduation speech. Filed under my maiden name. Filed with intent to pursue assets he'd tried to shield from joint property. But the page that stopped him cold, absolutely froze him, was the notarized trust document I'd drawn up 6 weeks earlier. It placed our primary home, my retirement fund, and both college savings accounts in a protective trust managed under my name, with our children as the sole long-term beneficiaries. Because I wasn't going to let his midlife crisis become our daughter's financial disaster. He'd laughed at me once years ago when I said I wanted to understand our estate plan better. "That's what I'm for," he told me, almost amused. "You worry about the house, I'll worry about the future." He should have known better. He always underestimated quiet. While he was building an escape plan, I was building a fortress. I made moves he didn't even see. I consulted a forensic accountant who helped me trace every dollar. I froze access to the joint line of credit under a clause he forgot existed in our mortgage agreement. I moved our family's health insurance under my employer's plan a month before he could cancel it without warning. I'd even contacted the private school Ava was considering for college and added a clause to her financial aid application that would protect her from fluctuations in household income during the pending divorce. The administrator was kind. She said, "You're smart to think ahead." I wasn't just thinking ahead. I was preparing for war, but the kind of war fought in silence, with paper, with planning, with patience. The envelope also included a request for him to refrain from contacting Ava until after finals, a buffer, for her, not for me. She didn't deserve to carry the weight of his selfishness during her last week of high school. I wasn't protecting him from her judgment. I was protecting her from his chaos. Daniel read through all of it while standing there, surrounded by folding chairs and murmurs. His eyes scanned faster as he turned the pages, but his face turned paler with each line. When he reached the last page, the postnup we'd signed after our second child was born, he stopped. That page was his signature, next to mine, agreeing that any affair resulting in financial harm would nullify his right to spousal support. He'd signed it in 2009 after I found a suspicious email chain he swore was nothing. I had let it go then, believing him, but I had kept the document, and now it was in his hand, evidence that his game was over before it began. He folded the papers slowly and tucked them back into the envelope. When he looked at me, he didn't speak. His mouth opened once, like he might start to apologize or deny or ask for mercy. But I had already turned away. He thought the envelope would be symbolic. It was tactical, and it was only the beginning. The walk back to the car was the longest I've ever taken. Not because of the distance, but because of the stairs. People didn't know what had just happened exactly, but they knew something had. A silence like that doesn't fall over a crowd unless something breaks. And Daniel's face, flushed and frozen, told them all they needed to know. Ava caught up with me outside the gymnasium. Her eyes were red, but dry. She didn't yell, didn't collapse. She simply asked, What the hell was that? I put my arm around her and said, "That was your father choosing himself." But what came next, that envelope, was me choosing us. We drove home in silence, the air between us heavy but not angry. She was piecing it together. I knew she'd need time. I didn't explain every detail, just said the truth, that I had known for a while, that I hadn't wanted to ruin her day, but that he had forced my hand. She nodded, staring out the window. "He really did that in front of everyone," she muttered. I didn't reply. What was there to say? The days that followed were strange. Ava stayed mostly in her room, but she came out for dinner. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. Daniel tried calling her twice, but she let it go to voicemail. I never asked to hear the messages, and she never offered. All I knew was that the second night, she came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes, leaned against the counter, and said, "I'm proud of you." It nearly broke me. The news spread fast. We lived in a tight-knit community, and Daniel's public stunt ensured he'd given up any claim to discretion. Some people reached out to me with awkward sympathy, others with veiled curiosity, hoping for gossip. I gave them nothing. Let them wonder. Let them try to piece together the story from rumors and silence. Daniel, for his part, didn't show up at the house. My lawyer had already sent a formal letter restricting uninvited visits and outlining his rights during the pending divorce. He did try to reach me through mutual friends, an old college buddy, one of Ava's old soccer coaches, but I didn't engage. I'd said all I needed to say, and it was typed on crisp paper, wrapped in an envelope, and handed to him in front of everyone he was trying to impress. That was the thing. Daniel didn't just blindside me. He tried to stage it, like he wanted to script his exit for maximum attention, hoping to catch me off guard and control the story. But what he didn't realize was that I had already written a different ending, one that didn't end with him walking away clean. Ava told me later that her friends were shocked. Some had heard their parents talking. One said, "Your mom's a badass." Ava laughed when she told me that. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in days. The fallout wasn't fire and screaming. It was quieter, more surgical. Daniel began losing things I didn't even have to take: his credibility, his dignity, his image. He wanted to be seen as powerful, decisive. Instead, he came off careless and cruel. The man who tried to humiliate his wife at their daughter's graduation and wound up holding the evidence of his own undoing. Once the emotional dust settled, I went back into strategy mode. I knew Daniel would try to recover control. He always had a fallback plan, a way to charm, negotiate, or wear people down. But this time, I wasn't leaving any windows open. I met with my attorney, Priya, twice a week. Every time I stepped into her office, it felt like armor being fitted. We mapped out every angle: marital assets, retirement accounts, the house, and the discretionary trust I'd placed the college funds into. Daniel had made one critical mistake. He assumed I didn't understand our finances. He handled the investments, sure, but he never thought I'd quietly take courses, consult financial planners, or learn how to read statements like legal documents. Priya brought in a forensic accountant, a woman named Elise, precise and unsentimental. She found a pattern in Daniel's credit card charges: multiple dinners in San Francisco, paid out of his business account but unrelated to any listed client. Flights to Seattle that never appeared on our shared calendar, hidden cash withdrawals. Elise's report was cold and devastating. We added it to the file. We also uncovered a joint property in Montana I hadn't known about. His name only, but purchased while we were still married. He thought registering it under a shell company would keep it hidden. It didn't. That was a crucial misstep. In the state's eyes, it was still marital property. Priya called it a gift. I remained outwardly calm. I still went to work, still took walks with Ava, still smiled politely when neighbors passed by, pretending they didn't want to ask questions. But internally, I was sharpening every edge. I opened a new account for myself, under a trust, shifted my remaining personal savings, created a digital trail that showed clean separation. I canceled joint subscriptions, switched utility bills, prepared for the inevitable moment when Daniel would try to slow things down or manipulate terms. He did try. He had his lawyer send over a proposal, a staggered separation of assets, shared custody of our younger son, and, stunningly, a request for a non-disparagement clause that would keep details of the divorce confidential. I declined. Priya's response was a single sentence. My client has no interest in protecting your client's public image. What I wanted wasn't vengeance in the dramatic sense. I didn't want him to suffer in a way that would satisfy a movie plot. I wanted him to understand that I was never the woman he assumed I was, the one who would cry in court, fold under pressure, or trade silence for comfort. Instead, I let the system speak for me. Every document I filed was a boundary. Every legal clause I invoked was a message. Every move I made said one thing: you don't get to walk away clean. We didn't speak again until the preliminary hearing. It wasn't a courtroom scene with drama and raised voices, just a long beige conference room with lawyers, paperwork, and the sterile air of scheduled conflict. Daniel sat across from me in a gray suit that looked slightly too large, like he'd lost weight or confidence, or both. He gave me a glance that tried to say something, maybe regret or explanation, but I didn't look long enough to read it. I didn't need to. His lawyer opened with a soft pitch, asking for mediation to revisit terms. He claimed Daniel was open to reasonable compromise, that he hoped to move forward with mutual respect. It was so sanitized, so carefully rehearsed, it almost made me laugh. Priya didn't blink. We have no interest in renegotiating terms that were violated before they were even acknowledged. My client's offer stands: clean division of assets, retention of the primary residence, full control of trust accounts, and zero spousal support as per the postnup. Daniel's attorney tried to push. There's concern about reputational damage, public narrative, fairness. That's when I spoke. Fairness? I said, my voice even. You mean like standing up in front of hundreds of people, including our daughter, and announcing a divorce you had already planned without discussing it with your spouse? That kind of fairness? Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped. The room held a breath. I leaned forward, not to intimidate, but to finish the conversation on my terms. You didn't want dignity, Daniel. You wanted dominance. You thought if you controlled the story, you controlled the outcome. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't need volume, just timing. He looked at me for a long moment, then finally said, I didn't think you'd do all this. I nodded slowly. I know. The rest was procedural. His attorney made small adjustments to language, clarified tax responsibilities, but nothing changed the core. He would leave the marriage with exactly what he brought into it. No more, no less. The Montana property, liquidated, the hidden accounts, closed and reallocated. His lawyer agreed to every term in the envelope. Afterward, in the hallway, Daniel tried to approach me. I didn't expect it to end like this. I turned to him, not angry, just done. Then maybe you should have asked me how I wanted it to end. He opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. That moment was the reversal. Not just legally, but emotionally. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about closure. He lost the power to control the story, and I reclaimed the right to finish it. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. No drawn-out drama, no courtroom theatrics, just signatures, filings, and the final silence of a chapter closing. I kept the house, not because I needed the space, but because it felt right to reclaim it. I redecorated slowly, stripping away the pieces that were his. The leather couch he picked out was donated. The kitchen was repainted. Warm tones, not the cool gray he liked. I took back the house inch by inch until it felt like mine again. Ava stayed with me while she figured out college plans. Some evenings, we'd sit on the porch with tea and talk about nothing important: music, books, what she wanted to study. She never asked for the full story, and I never offered it. But she knew. She had seen it happen in real time, and that was enough. Daniel never tried to fight again. He signed what needed to be signed, moved into a condo across town, and faded from the daily rhythm of our lives. Every so often, I'd hear from someone who saw him at a bar or out with a woman half his age. I didn't care. That wasn't my life anymore. I went back to teaching part-time and started consulting for schools on curriculum design. It was work that filled my days and left room for myself, something I hadn't prioritized in years. I took a short trip alone to the coast and spent 3 days without speaking to anyone unless I wanted to. It was the most peace I'd felt in years. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I thought I would be, but what I felt was something deeper: relief, pride, clarity. I had been prepared to collapse. Instead, I had stood still while everything around me shifted and I remained whole. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud, destructive, but sometimes revenge is simply not letting someone ruin you. Sometimes it's choosing not to scream, not to explain, not to chase an apology that never comes. Sometimes revenge is just living well, with boundaries, with peace, with quiet power. I signed the final paperwork on a Thursday. The clerk stamped the file and slid it across the desk. "It's done," she said. I smiled, tucked it into my bag, and walked out into the afternoon sun. And just like that, I was free. If someone ever tried to write you out of your own story, remember, the quietest moves can change the ending completely. This wasn't just a divorce story, it was a reminder. You don't need rage to reclaim your power. You need strategy, stillness, and the courage to stay standing when others expect you to fall. If this spoke to something inside you, tap the like button so others can find this too. Share it with someone who needs to remember their strength. And if you've ever handed someone their own silence in an envelope, tell us how you did it.